The olive trees of Gethsemane twisted in the darkness, their gnarled branches reaching out like silent observers in the night. The air was thick, not just with the humidity of the coming storm, but with a palpable tension that pressed against the chest. History, as it is taught in Sunday schools, tells us that Jesus gathered his disciples there to pray in agony before the Roman soldiers arrived. But the texts found in Nag Hammadi, the ancient library buried in the sands of Egypt for nearly 2,000 years, suggest a different conversation took place in those final, critical hours. As the torches of the approaching guard flickered ominously in the distance, the narrative suggests he was not focused on the political power of Rome or the betrayal of Judas. His concern was directed toward something far more pervasive, something invisible yet absolute in its control over human destiny. He spoke to them not of physical chains, but of the rulers of the mind, the architects of an invisible prison that had governed human consciousness for eons. The Gnostics, in their forbidden texts, called them the Archons. In that garden, amidst the silence of sleeping Jerusalem, a transfer of knowledge occurred. It was not a complex ritual involving incense or chants. It was not a long sermon on morality. It was a key. A linguistic and cognitive key designed to unlock the psychological constructs that bind the human spirit to a cycle of fear, limitation, and recurring suffering. For centuries, we have looked at these stories as religious allegory, dismissing them as myths. But what if we viewed them through the lens of advanced psychology and the mechanics of consciousness? What if the prison, described in these ancient texts, is not a metaphysical place you go to after death, but a state of mind that we inadvertently reinforce every single day of our lives? Tonight, we are going to deconstruct this ancient concept with surgical precision. We will look at the specific mechanism of control described in the Apocryphon of John and the Gospel of Philip, and we will analyze the two specific words that were offered as the antidote. This is not about belief or dogma. It is about understanding the architecture of your own awareness and how language itself creates the reality you experience. To understand the solution, we must first map the problem in detail. The term Archon comes from the Greek word for ruler or authority. In the Gnostic cosmology, these were not merely political figures. They were described as inorganic forces that preside over the material realm. While ancient texts personified them as jealous entities guarding the threshold of the divine, a modern psychological interpretation offers a more grounded yet equally disturbing perspective. Think of the Archons not as demons with pitchforks, but as autonomous complexes within the human psyche. Carl Jung, the father of analytical psychology, spoke of complexes as splintered fragments of the psyche that act with their own will. They are the recurring patterns of self-sabotage, the intrusive thoughts that do not feel like your own, and the systems of belief that limit human potential. They are the voice that says, "Give up," just as you are about to succeed. They are the sudden wave of anxiety that hits when everything is going well. The ancient text, the hypostasis of the Archons, describes their primary method of control: distraction and emotional harvesting. They operate by keeping the human mind in a state of perpetual reaction. Fear, anger, desire, and guilt are the frequencies that sustain this system. When you are lost in a loop of anxiety about the future or regret about the past, you are, in the Gnostic view, feeding the rulers. You are directing your vital creative energy, your divine spark, into a simulation of reality rather than reality itself. This is where the concept becomes terrifyingly relevant to our modern digital world. We live in an economy that is literally designed to harvest attention. Every notification on your phone, every sensational news headline, every social comparison on Instagram is designed to trigger a low-level fight or flight response. We are constantly reacting, constantly externalizing our power, constantly looking outside ourselves for validation or safety. The ancient teachers argued that this is not accidental. It is a design. The matrix is not a computer program. It is a linguistic and emotional web that convinces you that you are small, separate, and powerless. The brilliance of this trap lies in its subtlety. It does not require bars or chains. It requires your consent. It works by convincing you to identify with the limitation. When a thought arises that says, "I am not good enough," or "I am always anxious," the trap snaps shut the moment you believe that thought is you. You fuse your infinite consciousness with a finite negative definition. This is the mechanism of the Archon. It is a parasitic mimicry that substitutes your true nature with a counterfeit identity, often referred to in the texts as the counterfeit spirit. Jesus, in the Gnostic traditions, specifically in texts like the Gospel of Thomas, is often presented not as a savior who demands worship, but as a revealer of knowledge, a gnosis. He understood that you cannot fight the darkness with a sword, because the darkness is in the mind. Fighting it only feeds it with more emotional energy. You must turn on the light, and the switch for that light is encoded in the very structure of language. The teaching given in the garden centers on the phrase ego eimi in Greek. Translated, it means I am. But to understand why this is a weapon against psychological enslavement, we must strip away the religious dogma and look at the metaphysics of these words. I am is not a description. It is the declaration of existence itself. It is the verbalization of the subject before it becomes an object. In the Old Testament, when Moses asks the burning bush for its name, the reply is, I am that I am. It is a statement of absolute, unconditioned being. It is the sound of the universe becoming self-aware. It is the frequency of the source itself. However, in our daily lives, we almost never use I am in its pure, sovereign form. We immediately attach a predicate to it. We say, I am tired, I am poor, I am lonely, I am a failure. Notice the mechanism here. You are taking the power of the infinite subject, the I am, which is the creative force of the universe, and you are collapsing it into a tiny, limited box. You are using the creative power of your own consciousness to forge the chains of your own prison. The ancient texts suggest that the rulers rely on this misuse of language. They need you to define yourself. As long as you are defined, you are confined. If you define yourself as a victim, you will unconsciously screen out opportunities for victory. If you define yourself as lacking, you will be blind to the abundance around you. The counterfeit spirit attaches itself to the soul by weighing it down with these definitions, layer by layer, until the soul forgets it is free. So what happens when we stop the sentence? What happens when we reclaim the I am without the attachment? This brings us to the core technique discussed in the Hidden Gospels. It is a practice of radical subtraction. It is the act of stripping away every label, every history, every trauma, and every future projection until only the raw sense of existence remains. Imagine for a moment that you are back in that garden. The chaos of the world is closing in. The narrative of your life, your debts, your relationships, your fears is screaming for attention. The instinct is to fight it or to run from it. Instead, you stop. You withdraw your attention from the story and place it entirely on the feeling of being. You say, silently or aloud, I am. And you stop there. In that silence, a profound shift occurs in the psyche. By refusing to finish the sentence, you are refusing to enter the matrix of definition. You are standing at the threshold of consciousness. You are asserting that you exist prior to your problems. You exist prior to your body. You exist prior to your name. You exist prior to the concept of time itself. This is not just a spiritual exercise. It is a neurological reset. When you interrupt the pattern of negative self-definition, you disrupt the neural pathways that have been reinforced by years of habit. The Archons, those automatic negative thought loops, search for a hook to grab onto. They look for the sadness to attach to the I am. But when you offer them only the blank wall of absolute existence, they have no purchase. They cannot feed on pure awareness. They can only feed on the identity you construct. The Gnostics taught that this state of pure awareness is your connection to the pleroma, the fullness of the divine. It is a frequency that is invisible to the rulers of this realm. When you rest in the I am, you literally disappear from their radar. You are in the world, but not of it. You are operating from a different operating system. But let us be practical. How does one apply this in a modern context without falling into superstition? It requires a disciplined observation of your own internal monologue. Most of us are addicted to our own suffering. We derive a sense of self from our struggles. I am the one who always gets treated badly. I am the one who never succeeds. These are stories, and they are the bars of the cage. The practice is to catch yourself in the act of creation. Every time you feel a contraction of energy, fear, shame, anger, pause. Notice the sentence you are writing in your mind. It likely starts with, I am, or my life is. The technique is to cut the circuit. Replace the complex narrative with the simple command, I am. Feel the difference in the body. I am anxious creates a tightness in the chest. It locates you as a small entity under threat. Now, drop the anxious. Just sit with, I am. The energy expands. The anxiety is still there, floating in the space, but you are no longer identical to it. You are the space in which the anxiety is happening. You have moved from the screen of the movie to the projector. However, we must address a critical warning found in the texts. The Archons are cunning. If they cannot keep you in the trap of misery, they will try to trap you in the trap of spiritual arrogance. This is the danger of the spiritual ego. When you start to feel the power of I am, the temptation is to say, I am God, or I am better than these sleeping people. The moment you add those concepts, you are back in the trap. You have just created a new identity, a spiritual identity. But it is still an identity. It is still a definition. The Archons can feed on arrogance just as easily as they feed on despair. The true practice is to remain in the nothingness, the void of potential, without claiming titles or superiority. Furthermore, the texts warn of a challenge known in psychology as an extinction burst. The moment you begin to practice this, the Archons will push back. When you try to break a habit, the brain screams to get the dopamine hit of the old behavior. When you stop identifying as a victim, your ego will panic. It feels like death to the ego. It will bombard you with reasons why you should be afraid, why you should be angry. It will whisper, this is nonsense. You are not infinite. Look at your bank account. Look at your past failures. This is the test. It is the storm in the garden. The text advises that one must remain vigilant. You do not fight these thoughts. Fighting them gives them reality. You do not argue with them. You simply witness them. Acknowledge them as not me, and then return to the anchor, I am. You reassert your position as the observer. As you deepen this practice, the effects described in the texts begin to manifest as tangible psychological changes. The first sign is a sensation of lightness. The garments of heaviness, as the Gnostics called the physical body's conditioning, begin to loosen. You may feel a physical release of tension in the shoulders and the back of the neck, areas where we unconsciously carry the weight of our identities and societal masks. The second effect is clarity of perception. When you are no longer projecting your internal definitions onto the world, you see reality as it is, not as you fear it to be. The colors seem sharper. The actions of others are seen for what they are, their own programming acting out rather than personal attacks against you. You stop taking the world personally because there is no little person left to be offended. There is only the I am observing the play. The third and perhaps most profound effect is the restoration of will. The ancient texts say that the Archons steal our power of consent. By keeping us in a state of reaction, we never truly choose. We just respond to stimuli. When you center yourself in the I am, you step out of the stimulus-response loop. You create a gap. In that gap, you can choose how to act. You become a creator rather than a creature. You begin to shape reality not by force, but by resonance. This knowledge was suppressed for a reason. It is the ultimate act of rebellion. It does not require a temple, a priest, or a payment. It requires only the courage to face the silence of one's own being. It bypasses the intermediaries. The Garden of Gethsemane is not just a historical location. It is a metaphor for the dark night of the soul that every seeker must pass through. It is that moment when the external world presses in, when the authorities of fear and doubt surround you. In that moment, you have a choice. You can succumb to the narrative of the victim, drifting back into the sleep of the masses, or you can remember the key. You can remember that the name of the divine is your own name, stripped of all adjectives. As we conclude this analysis, it is important to understand that this is not a magic spell. It is not a quick fix for a bad day. Saying the words without the shift in consciousness is empty noise. It is the recognition that carries the power. It is the feeling of dropping the baggage. It is the visceral experience of returning home to yourself. Tonight, you might find yourself surrounded by the noise of the world. You might feel the pressure of the rulers, the bills, the expectations, the regrets, the breaking news. When that happens, try the experiment. Do not ask to be saved by an external force. Do not ask for things to change instantly. Simply retreat to the center of your awareness. Take a breath. Let the story fall away. And in the silence, declare your existence. I am. Notice that nothing needs to be added to that statement for it to be true. It is the only truth that cannot be taken from you. Everything else, your job, your relationships, your body, your reputation, can change. But the I am remains. It is the constant. It is the eternal witness. The texts from Nag Hammadi suggest that when a soul fully realizes this truth, the Archons become transparent. They lose their grip because there is nothing left for them to hold on to. You become like the wind felt, but ungraspable. You become free. This is the legacy that was left in the shadows of the olive trees. It is a legacy of radical freedom. The door to the prison was never locked. We were just so busy reading the graffiti on the walls that we forgot to turn the handle. The key is in your possession. The conversation in the garden continues, not in history books, but in the quiet spaces of your own mind. The choice to remain a character in the story or to become the author of the experience is yours. The words are simple. The realization is infinite. I am. As you integrate this perspective, consider how much of your daily energy is consumed by maintaining the story of who you are. How much energy goes into defending an image, regretting a past error, or rehearsing a future conflict? This is the energy harvest described by the ancients. Reclaiming that energy is the first step toward what modern psychology calls self-actualization, and what the ancients called gnosis. It is a path of subtraction. You do not need to learn who you are. You need to unlearn who you are not. The Archons of our modern age algorithms, the societal pressures, the internal critics are relentless. They will constantly invite you back into the smallness. They will offer you outrage, seduction, and fear to lure you back into the dense identity. But once you have tasted the spaciousness of the I am, the cage becomes uncomfortable. You can no longer fit back into the limited version of yourself. This is the beginning of true awakening. It is not fireworks and visions. It is the quiet, steady certainty of your own existence. So as you move forward from this moment, carry this key with you. Use it not as a weapon to fight the world, but as a shield to preserve your peace. When the chaos rises, return to the source. You are not the mind. You are not the emotion. You are not the circumstance. You are. And that is enough.